Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday news episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have not Alex, we have our cryptozoology expert, Michael, here today to help answer. Well, actually, we're not answering questions, thank God. Instead, we're going to start talking about some hacker news that happened this week. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Shall we start?
I was getting ready for some cryptozoology.
Oh,
stuff,
you
but
want the
no,
cryptozoology
we are
news?
completely fine. All right. So good to see everybody that is joining us today. Lots happened this week. And also there are some things that I complained about last week that I'm going to complain about again. So Michael, do you want to start or shall I?
Sure, I'll start us off. Just give me a second here. So
That's me.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll do, no, wait.
Fine.
So explaining Alex's absence, it's because Alex is frantically working on his workshop, which is happening in Los Angeles this weekend. So if you are interested in attending a very spooky Halloween hacking workshop, make sure to check this out because it also supports Null Space Labs, which is an awesome hackerspace in Los Angeles. So Alex is fine. He's just currently working on this workshop. And if you want to come check it out, then take a look at the Universe tickets here. I have retweeted this, so has Alex, and I'm sure he would be happy to see some people there. All right, I'll go since you're still on my screen. So we touch a little bit on the drama around the Flipper Zeros that had been imported into the United States. For me, I bought one. People keep asking us when we're going to do a review on Flipper, and I am trying, my friends. I am trying real hard. However, a entire container of flippers containing like 15,000 of them or something.
That's a lot.
Yeah, was seized by the U.S. government and then held for a really long time, like 30 days. And finally, they were just given them back. And they're like, we had to take a look at it. Looks all good. So this was very scary, obviously, for Flipper. They started like sending some of the orders out of band to try to see if they could get around this, if it was like a global block on them, or if it was just like individual like bad luck in terms of getting a container seized. But it seems like it was just bad luck on that one container. And now the devices are all either fully backdoored or they are just directly on their way. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but maybe they got a firmware update. Who knows? But really nobody knows exactly why these were held for as long as they were and then seemingly given back without any sort of feedback as to what the problem was. But it is good news for everybody, mostly me though, who ordered a Flipper and was anxiously waiting for it to get out of Flipper jail. So we also have an update to the PiPico W. So the PiPico is a useful tool, but for me, I am spoiled. I'm used to microcontrollers that have Wi-Fi, that can connect to the internet and do all this useful stuff and have like more bidirectional communication abilities. And in this case, the PiPico W was awesome, but it doesn't have a lot of support for CircuitPython, which is a language a lot of beginners like to use for creating prototypes, and even more advanced people who like using Python for doing this sort of microcontroller programming. So if you manage to get your hands on a Pico W, then you can get started using the Wi-Fi. You don't have to continue to pretend that it is just a PiPico anymore. So if you're interested in using Python on microcontrollers and you have a PiPico W, or even if you just have a PiPico, I recommend you check this out because there's now a good setup guide and they are pushing new versions of CircuitPython. I think they're on 8.02 beta right now. Yeah, it's going really well. So definitely something to check out if you have a PiPico W. I know those came out a while ago and some people have been, kind of confused as to what to do with them. And then also every week, I like to go through and point out a couple really cool resources I found. And in this case, there's been a lot to do around like text to image generation. So that's like DALL-E and like prompts where you can like specify something and then it actually like makes something based on that prompt. I didn't know that there were also some other interesting ones like text to audio. You can say the sound of a horse like clumping with like a rain on like a tin roof and the sound of thunder, and it will literally generate that audio scene, and it's very creepy. Like the audio.
So
that comes
just
from
to clarify, but it's not text to speech; it's
text to audio.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of this. So text to speech, yeah. There's some cool developments in this. Text to audio, the sound of a train, people talking, birds chirping. So this audio gen is I probably won't be able to hear it without hearing myself looped. But you can specify a man speaks and birds chirp and dogs bark, and it actually, like, the speech is unintelligible, but if you were like halfway, kind of waking up, like, it sounds like, somebody talking in the other room and these other noises. So it doesn't sound cheap. Like, it doesn't sound like a bunch of audio clips just like mashed on top of each other. There's enough like microphone distortion, like other stuff, that it actually sounds plausible, like the way that we're used to hearing these sounds. So the fact that you could generate an audio environment that would make someone think that you're in a very specific place and do this from scratch, like, that is something that I had no idea was so easy to do, or that there were tools available to do that.
Yeah, and that sounds like a high dollar like audio editing tool, because like I could see a lot of video editors using that for like background or ambient type noise. But then also that seems very scary for targeted phishing attacks, because I've seen phishing attacks where, you need like a baby crying in the background to like give a sense of urgency or something like that. Like, if you could real time like create any audio scene that you needed, that could be
the sound of a landlord knocking. Oh,
yeah,
I'm so sorry, I have to go. So very, very creepy. So look, there's a lot here. So what about audio to audio? What do you think that would be? Well, audio to audio is, let's say I record a very short clip of Michael saying something. I could then feed that into this model, which will then extrapolate what he's saying with a language model and also mimic his voice. So what this is doing is it's taking a prompt and it is doing speech continuation. And I really wish it was closed caption, because it would be a lot better for this, this particular section. But I implore you to check this out, because it's really cool. They will both do speech and things like piano. So in this case, they're playing a very small part on a piano, and the learning model is basically completing the song the way it imagines it should go. So you could start with like so for artistic things, you could start with something very, very small and then end up with an entire composition based on the pacing and the sound and the other attributes of the initial audio clip. Whereas with speech, again, you could start out with a very small bit of really recorded speech and extrapolate that into something that the person never said. So that is really weird.
That's really interesting, because I do use a tool for work here that allows me to have a person read a paragraph and then I can recreate their voice. But I've not seen that applied to other generic audio sounds before. So that'll be really interesting to see how that's used.
Yeah, so then of course we have text to video. So rather than just having, the like DALL-E style like images, you can actually continue that animation. And some of these are really weird. They kind of look like, this looks like Skyrim, I guess. Like, I don't really know like the animation style, but you can get pretty specific. And while these are not like particularly stunning in terms of the quality, the fact that they are completely generated from prompts is really interesting. So another one is using these sorts of like 3D models. So rather than making it kind of a flat animation as the first one did, it's able to create, like, look at this flying dog dressed as Superman, or like a, nice. Like a bear painting itself. An endless line of unicorns running along the beach, or whatever, it was. This is weird looking. So text to motion. This is describing an action that a human would take and then having like a human model be able to actually do that. So in this case, these prompts are: a person walks forward, bends down to pick something up off the ground. And you're having natural looking movement models being generated by these text prompts that allow you to specify what you want like a 3D model to do and do it. So if you're like making a deep fake, or you're creating a video game, like this would give you the ability to create natural looking motion for doing certain things with enough variation that it looks organic. It looks like really like good, honestly. So we also have another text to motion. This one's a little bit, less sophisticated, but if you're doing like a stick model and you're just mapping something over this, then you really have something here in terms of being able to make motions that are not, programmed explicitly. So that leads us to text to 3D models.
Oh, so that's spooky.
Yeah, so being able to create 3D models of objects, perhaps to then skin with this motion, is also something that is currently possible that I was not really aware of. So the fact that you can generate these like relatively, decent little 3D models based on text prompts is something that, again, I just did not know was possible. And here are some other examples of ones that have color built in and are approaching the level that I imagine people could have sold as an NFT a couple months back. Like the squirrel freaking out about pie charts. Like in particular, I think if I was caught up in that NFT craze, I would have probably gone for that one. A ghost eating a hamburger. But if you wanted to print this out or if you wanted to animate it, then all the tools kind of exist in these tool chains to be able to do that. Now, I don't know about brain to text. I don't know. I don't know about this one. It's very interesting, but I'm going to focus on these other ones because I'm a little bit more interested in like this hippo eating a watermelon that was generated by like a text prompt.
So how long do you think it is until all of this is combined so that a person, say, could make a deep fake by simply feeding a prompt to a machine and say, like, President Joe Biden announces to the news that everyone gets $1 million or some, stuff like that?
I'm just going to say the adult entertainment industry is going to use this far before the nefarious deepfake crowd uses it, just based on historical experience with how new technology enters the market. So I think we're a ways off.
Okay. But yeah, it definitely seems like we're going to get very sophisticated phishing scams in the future using this sort of stuff. Like, I think there's other good uses for it, but as far as like concerning security, I think that's going to be one of the first things we see.
Yeah. All right. So let's go over to you now. That's the majority of the resources I have to point out this week. I like to just point things out that I think are cool, especially when they relate to, like Michael said, like phishing or like new software tools. So those are the ones to check out this week.
Yeah. So, okay. As we've discussed many, many times on here, certain NAS devices that start with a Q frequently have ransomware attacks. And the Deadbolt ransomware is one of the key ransomwares that target these machines. Well, in a big win for the police and for several companies, the Dutch National Police were able to get the decryption keys for 155 of these NAS devices that had ransomware put on them. And, I'm really glad to see this because, oftentimes it feels like, the police are hamstrung because they have to be reactionary. And so they were still reactionary in the sense, but they were able to do something proactive and go out, and they were able to trick the Deadbolt ransomware because essentially, ransomware people, when they're doing this many ransoms, they have to make the system automated, right? They don't want to like handle each individual ransom when it's such a small amount. So they had an automated system so that when you pay the ransom, essentially the bot would just send you your decryption key. It, however, did not give the proper time for the Bitcoin block to end and to be finalized. So what the police were able to do is send this transaction and then withdraw it because it was a very congested time in the block. And they knew they'd only have one shot at this. So they tried all the accounts they had access to. And so they were able to get the 155 decryption keys. Say they paid the ransom, the machine gave them the keys, and then they withdrew the transaction before the block ended. Now, unfortunately, of course, this was detected fairly quickly. So the ransomware gang did eventually shut this down. But in that one couple minute time frame, the police were able to recover 90% of the keys for all the victims that reported the attacks to the police, which I think also is a very important point, if you are a company, to report these things to the authorities, because sometimes they might actually be able to do something that is helpful, such as, recovering your ransom.
Wow, Michael, that sounds like a lot of cryptozoology jargon. If I'm to understand correctly, the attackers built a bot that was flawed because it sent the decryption keys before the Bitcoin transaction could be completed.
Yeah.
And the cops just basically rolled back the Bitcoin transaction because they're notoriously slow after receiving the decryption keys. Is that right?
Basically.
Okay, cool. I guess I did understand that after all.
Okay. Moving on. So in previous weeks, we've discussed how Hondas and other vehicles are susceptible to attacks in their wireless keys, etc. Well, the police have been able to dismantle a criminal ring, which has been targeting keyless access to vehicles. Now, this isn't actually Hondas and the previous attacks we've been looking at. However, what it looks like this gang was doing is they were using a automotive analysis tool that was used, by mechanics and people like that. I believe we might be having a special guest here on the stream. I'm just going to emphasize this for any long-term viewers. But But yeah, so basically this ring was taking this automotive tool and uploading new firmware to the keyless entry systems of these vehicles. And they were able to leverage that to steal some of these high-priced vehicles.
I would not describe Hondas as a high
No.
vehicle.
That's why I was saying, while
All right.
you were absent, it is not Hondas that this was targeting, as far as I understand. But yeah, so it's really interesting because this takedown took down like everything that was involved, because there were software developers. They even seized over €1 million in criminal assets. So it does seem like this was a fairly sophisticated scheme for stealing vehicles through uploading proprietary firmware. But
right.
yes, I'll turn it over to you for a bit.
Cool. So Meta was finally defeated in something meaningful. And I feel like this is a pretty good win for the internet, because a lot of these tech companies will attempt to force through an acquisition that is extremely anti-competitive. And by the time that acquisition has been done, it's very, very rare. In fact, it's practically never happened that a done deal with a tech company has been rolled back by a regulator. But in this case, it actually happened. So Giphy was being purchased by Meta, and the deal had already gone through, but a UK regulator managed to roll this back by examining it and also listening to some pretty hilarious arguments by Giphy as to why this should be allowed to go through. So Giphy was arguing that, you know, even though this would decrease the competitors' ability to like access gifts and like potentially make it so they had to give up more of their consumers' information in order to get those gifts and do other things that would serve Meta very well in the marketplace, Giphy was arguing that gifts are now cringe and for boomers. That's a quote from their legal filing. And that, you know, it's not that big of a deal for them to actually be purchased by Meta, because, you know, nobody even likes these anymore and they've fallen out of fashion. So by attempting to downplay their business, they were really trying to argue that it's not that big of a deal we're being acquired because we're on our way out anyway. Nobody else would buy us. But Meta was very interested in this deal for a variety of reasons, both because of their market share in the UK advertising space, which is huge. It's like almost 50%. And then also some other ways that they could squeeze people who were working with Giphy for more customer information in order to improve some weird biometric, well, not biometric, but some weird identifiers they're trying to stick on people in order to track them more effectively across the internet. So this really did not set well with regulators. And it is, I believe, the first time a global regulator has undone a completed deal for anti-competitive reasons. And in this case, the various kind of sneaky advantages that Meta was getting from this were definitely not in the benefit of consumers. And most of them would never have come to light if this complaint was never brought and ultimately won. So I'm really happy that this happened, because a lot of times people's online freedoms or their privacy is eroded by some of these deals that are not good for them. But frankly, regulators don't have the power to actually do much about this. So this is a fairly rare case of a regulator actually doing the right thing because it had the power to, and rolling back a deal that was frankly just bad for consumers. All right, so we have more follow-up on my least favorite new Signal update. So the president of Signal gave an update on exactly why this is happening. And it's still not very convincing to me. Basically, they're saying that it's hard. They've agonized over it, but it's hard to support SMS. And they don't like SMS, and it's hard. So their other argument is that in some countries, SMS is billed at a high rate and people were getting confused between SMS messages and Signal messages, which kind of seems like you could just like change the background color or like give a little alert or something. But that apparently was not an option or enough for them. Instead, they decided that it's too hard to support SMS. I really am not pulling like a super good reason from this, other than that they're saying like it's expensive in development time to like work on this, and like Google is now pushing a different system, which is RCS, and it's set to replace SMS at some point. So I'm not convinced. I still think that this breaks a lot of people's use cases, and it makes it so that this is going to be something that is used by people for niche applications. It's not going to be a primary way of people communicating the way it currently is for a lot of Android users. And I will say, of all the people who have Signal installed, the ones who have iPhones text me back the least, because they frankly have to open a completely separate application in order to see my messages, and it totally disrupts the experience of communicating with people in general. So if that is the same experience they're about to bring to Android, then frankly it's going to become a lot less useful and a lot less possible to convince new people to use this, especially if they're not completely security minded and they're on a team that is. So yeah, I am not excited about this decision. I think it sucks. And having read through this interview, I still can't find a super good reason why. If you want to read this for me again and tell me why they can't just change the background to a different color, or find some way of continuing to support SMS for as long as it is supported on Android. Their argument that like SMS is going to be completely phased out, I think is like, we'll see. Like, I don't know when that's going to happen. And apparently neither do they. So dropping it at this point seems like an internal decision they're justifying based on like a future roadmap that like might or might not happen anytime soon, and is going to freeze out a lot of people who otherwise would use a very good app. So I expect it to be much harder to convince people to download Signal, at least like people with an Android device, after this decision. And I still vehemently oppose it and think it's super dumb.
Yeah. Did you say they've given any kind of time frame for when this will happen?
They've said in the next couple months, but if this is anything like other decisions that companies have made that have outraged their users, maybe they'll roll it back, because I'm going to keep talking about this every week until they do. Hopefully other people do too.
Yeah, it definitely seems negative press.
All right, so let's talk about killer robots. So this was an absolutely wild story out of the Oakland Police Department that revealed to its city council, or their oversight council, that they actually already had a robot that was capable of killing people. And when asked if they would ever do that, they were like, no, maybe. So, all right, let's go to this story. So this came up because they were attempting to establish policies with their civilian commission about what would happen with certain types of military technology or robots. So the council was under the impression that they did not currently have any killer robots, but during the discussion of this militarized equipment, it became known to them that the police department had something called a pan disruptor. Now, this is a percussion actuated non-electric, but what it actually is a shotgun. And a shotgun is a pretty simple weapon. So it's a tube with a primer, with a striker in the back to set off a shotgun shell. And in this case, it was designed to be able to blast through doors, or hold a blank, or hold certain non-lethal ammunition. However, as shotguns do, you can put pretty much anything in there, including lethal rounds. So this might not sound like a big deal, but upon being asked about this, the police department was actually kind of like, oh, we never thought of that. That's actually a good idea.
Wow.
And decided that they wanted to pursue two separate policies for review. Now, these two separate policies were this. One policy that says absolutely no shooting of people with robots at all. We don't want to be shot with a robot. We don't want you deciding who gets shot with robots. It's just not a good idea. The second policy says we shouldn't shoot people with robots, usually, but in the event that there's extreme circumstances and we just can't figure out what the heck to do, wouldn't it just be better to just shoot one guy with the robot? Just one guy. Just give me one guy to shoot with the robot, and I promise I will do such a good job. To be fair, police have already killed someone with a robot. I think the police department in Texas strapped a bomb to a bomb diffusing robot and send it over to go walk and sit down next to a sniper. So this is something that's already been done, where in the heat of the moment, police departments will absolutely use a robot that was not meant to kill someone because they feel like it's necessary, and they're just going to justify it later. In this case, seeking explicit justification to use killer robots to shoot people with a shotgun seems like one of those slippery slope things where, you allow one guy to get shot with a robot. You don't get to pick who that is. It could be you, who knows, in a couple of years. So fortunately, after some just stunning discussion back and forth, it was decided that the city of Oakland is not in favor of shooting people with robots, at least yet. So the police department decided to reverse their recommendation for the second policy that allowed for sometimes shooting of a person by a robot. And of course, I would agree with that. I don't want to be shot by a robot, and I think most people don't either. They have stressed that they have never used live ammunition in training exercises, and it's just not something that I think we really want. So I'm glad that they decided to come to the decision that no killer robot should be on the streets shooting people, but this is likely to come up in other places. So while the city of Oakland decided they didn't want that, other places might decide that they do. So it might become necessary to check your robot lethality laws before traveling to another jurisdiction, because you never know what you might be up against.
An interesting tangent on this too is not even necessarily robots using lethal devices, but maybe even less lethal, because clearly they're
already authorized.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, so like, should we even be using less? Yeah, I think it's a complex discussion, but very interesting. So over here on my screen, we have another reason why hacking is a crime. So a student was jailed for hacking female classmates' emails, Snapchats, and other accounts. So essentially, this guy was in Puerto Rico, attending university, and he decided to systematically hack 15 accounts of classmates using phishing and spoofing attacks. And I think this is a really important reminder of why not just like high-level people need to be concerned about spear phishing attacks. There's also, just average Joe can be targeted by, or average Jane in this case, could be targeted by a spear phishing attack, where these malicious individuals come along and want access to your account for nefarious purposes. And it also is a good reminder of, why you might not want to keep digital files that, make sure you have your stuff encrypted and very well protected. But what was also kind of surprising about this is, so the guy, I think, pled guilty or took a plea deal, but he only got 13 months, which kind of to me was striking, that, you could affect 15 people's lives so dramatically. Because if I wasn't clear before, like, he leaked very private photos of these individuals online, and stalked them and harassed them over a several month period. And for all of that, he got 13 months of jail time with 2 years of supervised release. So, reminder, look out for phishing attacks, keep your stuff locked down and encrypted. And if you want to do that, DuckDuckGo is here to rescue you, or at least for Mac. So recently, DuckDuckGo has released its Mac browser. So this is different than just the search engine. But they're working on a privacy-focused browser, which has some interesting features, including a built-in YouTube video player, which is capable of blocking ads and tracking. And this whole browser is really focused on blocking tracking, so much so that they claim they can save you 60% on your data just by not even loading tracking related elements in websites. And then also, one thing I really appreciate here, assuming that it works well and isn't buggy, is the integration of Bitwarden and 1Password. Because, a lot of browsers will have a built-in password manager, but it's usually pretty insecure. So a deep integration of password manager that's really secure could be really useful, especially for autofilling forms and stuff like that. To be clear, this app or the browser is only in beta. It's like 0.3 build, so it's still pretty buggy, but potentially promising. I seem to recall that a couple months ago there was something about DuckDuckGo. Do you remember that news piece? I couldn't find it off the top of my head, but hopefully DuckDuckGo gets everything squared away and they aren't overselling this.
That's interesting. I use Firefox Focus on my phone for the same reason, because it strips out so much of the tracking. And it's just wild how differently websites load when you have like built-in like stripping back of like tracking and advertising and stuff. All right, so over on my screen, we have one of the most interesting videos I've seen in a while. This is a DEF CON 30 brief on satellite radio attacks. So this is by James Paver. It's a really, really good talk on all the different ways that satellites are attacked and the various methods you can do to like both defend and attack them. So if you're looking for a really interesting and relatively brief talk on satellite hacking, I found this to be super easy to listen to and very informative. So, all right, a lot of people are excited about student loan debt relief. However, it is the perfect attack surface for people who are trying to run scams. So the FBI is warning that this is very likely to escalate as people start signing up for these kind of data intensive processes that require them to prove identity and send other documents that might otherwise not really be appropriate to send. So because you might believe that you're communicating with the government, makes it a lot more likely that you would send like copies of your ID or pay stubs or something like that that would allow them to impersonate you or commit some sort of fraud. So the FBI is warning that there's a couple approved email addresses that further requests for information will come from. That includes noreply@studentaid.gov, noreply@studentdebtrelief.studentaid.gov, and ed.gov@public.govdelivery.com. This one to me, it seems like a phishing attack.
No, that absolutely
I
is a
think that
phishing
maybe
attack.
they should just phase out that last one. But yeah, so apparently these are the official email addresses they'll communicate with you at. I just straight up wouldn't reply to this one. But then again, I'm not trying to get any student debt release. So yeah, just be aware that in the initial stages of signing up for this, they will not be reaching out to people who are applicable to this program. So if you're eligible for this program, the US government is not going to contact you at all. It is not part of the plan. They have not been approved to, and they are not going to. So if you get a SMS, an email, or something telling you that you are eligible for this program, it is fraud. If you know someone who's getting an SMS or something like this, informing them they're eligible and encouraging them to apply, it is fraud. So please be good to those around you. And if you see anybody who's excited about finding out that they're eligible for student debt relief and it's from like an SMS or an email, it is almost definitely fraud. And you should tell them that and maybe send them to this story. If you just get an email from this, I mean, I would still look at it a little cautiously. Yeah, so that is probably the most important thing to get across. Like, it is going to be a lot of scammers' dream to get in front of this and manage to collect all this personal data. But since the US government is not going to be reaching out to you, you should not expect any sort of message from them. And if you get something like that, you should immediately report it because it is part of a scheme. All right, so there is a wholesaler I've never heard of, I guess because I don't work in a industry sector that I've never heard of before, that is being affected by a cyber attack that is suspected to be ransomware, but we're not really totally sure yet. So this organization is apparently a wholesaler for like the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, and a couple other industries, which is why I've never heard of it because I don't have any of those myself. What is it? Oh, the HoReCa industry, which is hotels, restaurants, and catering. I did not know that that was an acronym, so I thought that they originally did something related to like horses, but that is not the case. They are a hospitality. You could just say hospitality, and it's pretty much, it is just that. I guess maybe they've rebranded. I don't know. But either way, it looks like this retailer, who is primarily based in Germany, France, and a couple other places, Austria, Germany, and France, is experiencing IT outages after a cyber attack, which again typically means ransomware, but they haven't confirmed exactly what's going on. It looks like, at least as far as they're saying, like this doesn't seem to be a data exfiltration attack. They're not warning people of a data breach yet, but it does look like there are store payment issues, and they've been forced to set up an offline payment system in order to deal with the fallout from this attack. So probably going to be future developments on this. We'll find out more about whether or not they get their network back, or if they're going to tell us, exactly what happened, or kind of sweep it under the rug.
Okay, so on my screen, I have a story here about Mark of the Web. Some of y'all may recall a couple months ago, back during the summer, we talked about Mark of the Web. Do you remember what Mark of the Web is?
Yeah, so Mark of the Web is a feature for Windows where if you download a file from the internet, it will automatically have a mark on it that prohibits it from running in certain privileged contexts. And this is designed to make it so that risky programs that were downloaded from the internet aren't able to automatically execute stuff and have a slightly higher bar when it comes to executing on the system. The problem is the creator of an unzipping application was making it so that when you downloaded a zip file from the internet and unzipped it, all the dangerous contents would not have the mark of the web. And this was done because like he just like didn't like mark of the web and he thought it was dumb. But this also broke a security feature that was actually kind of helping people on Windows and caused a big uproar because a lot of people actually didn't want these things running with higher privileges than they needed to be when the system already had a perfectly good defense built in using mark of the web.
Yeah.
Does that summarize it well?
Yes. No, that very good. And so, yeah, that original story was mostly focused on 7-zip and how it didn't carry over mark of the web. However, it was also reported in July how basically any several different archiving schemes would essentially erase the mark of the web. And so now this has been actively exploited by a number of groups for the past couple of months, and Microsoft has refused to address the issue. So there is now an official, or rather unofficial, patch from OPatch, which I've never heard of this platform, but apparently it's a platform for releasing Microsoft patches and such. So there is now a patch, so you can prevent these sorts of attacks from being carried out. Because, like Cody was saying, I think really the important thing is when mark of the web is in place, you're going to get all those pop-ups and alerts that are like, hey, this is probably not good. My macros are disabled by default and all that sort of thing. But when that's not present, then it's much more likely that a uneducated user could click or start a program or macro that they probably shouldn't. In further news, and kind of continuing this trend of carrying out attacks, a threat actor is now selling a bootkit called Black Lotus. So what's interesting here is this replaces or is uploaded into firmware on a BIOS level. So this completely circumvents any protections the operating system has in place, including any security software like antiviruses you might have on a system. And then what's really interesting is, these sorts of programs have existed for a number of years. However, it's normally been reserved for nation state actors or very highly skilled people. But what's happening here is on certain underground hacker forums, there is a criminal element attempting to sell this software for $5,000 a pop, which is a fair amount of money, but still, a lot less than paying nation state hackers, right? Or APT groups. And also, they're only charging like $200 to rebuild the software if it needs a change. So it's really going to be interesting looking at how these sort of programs perform going forward, because it's unclear if this is legitimate or a scam at this point. The software has built-in anti-virtual machine, or supposedly anti-debugging and other obfuscation that makes it hard to reverse engineer it and makes it very highly undetectable. So we haven't been able to get a hold of a sample to analyze it yet. It's possible that this could just be a malicious software intended at hacking the person who buys it, right? That is a common scam. But if this really exists and works the way it says it does, it points to a scary future in which lower and lower skilled hackers are going to be able to deploy exponentially powerful malware.
All right, so over on my screen, we have one of my least favorite companies continuing to get with fines that they don't care about because law enforcement and governments keep giving them far more money than they're losing. As long as that's the case, I think we're going to keep seeing these, but it looks like Clearview AI has yet again got a 20 million euro fine for illegal data collection. Now, if you know anything about Clearview AI, you know that's concerning because their entire business model is illegal data collection. Clearview AI is the company that's been going around and scraping your public photos off of the internet and compiling them into biometric ID bases for law enforcement and police use, and government use without your consent. So obviously that is a crime in a lot of jurisdictions. And in this case, it now has been brought against Clearview AI for French citizens. So they have already lost this case for Italian and Greek data protection authorities in March and July. France has joined on this because, frankly, they're an easy target because their entire business model just violates the hell out of most of the the data protections that are built into the European Union. So this is a company that doesn't really, again, care because they're getting most of their money from these contracts that are very, very lucrative. And it makes these sort of fines ineffective unless they're able to actually shut these businesses down or force compliance. However, that has not really been the case. So this controversial model is, again, built on taking public photos and compiling them into fingerprints that are often not that reliable for police and other investigators, using like blurry or partial imagery to try to identify someone. Now, yeah, this obviously violates GDPR because it doesn't give any sort of notification to people being swept up in this. It doesn't allow them to request that their data be deleted, and it's using people's public photos as a commercial product, essentially, to take everything you've posted on the internet that's public, scrape it, and then turn around and sell it as a useful tool to people who might be, I don't know, using it to get around the need to gather a warrant, or misidentifying you based on imagery that then there's no consequence to this software, or the people who make it if they do misidentify you and draw you into a criminal investigation when there's no reason to otherwise. So this technology has proven time and time again to have flaws. It also fundamentally operates on the lack of consent of users, because most people, if they had the option, would probably decide to not be in a massive database that's provided as a service, a paid service, to a bunch of governments around the world. So yeah, it's concerning that these sorts of fines are not having much of an impact on the operations of Clearview AI, because they don't seem to really care about this. Again, as long as they continue to get these big lucrative contracts, they will probably be able to ride out these sorts of fines. Yeah, so kind of depressing.
Okay, so on my screen here we have two data breaches. First one I'm going to talk about is MyDeal, which apparently, I believe here, is an Australian marketplace that connects retail places with online customers. Now, they had a data breach, and instead of like getting down on what, I want to look at some of the things they did right here. And so during this data breach, 2.2 million customers were impacted by the data breach. But what was good is because they had the data compartmentalized and broken up, the only data that was breached was names, email addresses, phone numbers, and a few birthdays, which, arguably you don't want any of that exposed, but it's a lot better than having the payment information, government IDs, and account passwords exposed. And so those all were secured. Now, what's interesting here to me as well is that the hacker who broke in, and it's not clear how they broke in. It seems like it was a phishing attack, but the press release was a little foggy on that. But the hacker is still selling all of this data on a forum for the grand total of $600, which seems like, why risk going to prison for $600? But it is very interesting that these crimes are becoming so commonplace, and that hackers feel like they can just perform a phishing attack and sell the data for $600, and it affects 2.2 million people. Arguably a lot of that data could probably be found in a phone book, like matching addresses with names and such. But it's an interesting breach nonetheless. Now, another Australian firm did a really good job when they were attacked. So this is a health insurance company here, and so they had an outage on their website for a couple hours, and it turns out it was an attempted ransomware attack. However, they were able to detect unusual network activity as the group was trying to perform the ransomware attack, and they were able to shut it down. Now, that's what caused the outage on their website, but arguably that's a better outcome than having all of your data encrypted. So it is very interesting to see how two different companies respond to these different circumstances. And also note that I'm really glad to see more and more companies being on the ball about when these data breaches happen, going ahead, sending emails out, sending texts out, letting the people know that they might have been impacted. For instance, here with this health insurance company, even though to the fullest of their knowledge, no data actually got leaked or outside of the network, they still went ahead and notified 2.8 million customers just to be on the safe side. So I really like seeing companies being proactive about that and making sure that they're taking care of their customers.
Oh, let's talk about the opposite of that.
Okay.
All right, so another company getting sued for data collection without consent is not Clearview AI, it's actually Google. Now, what's surprising to me about this case is the state that is suing Google to protect its citizens' privacy. Can you guess what that state is?
Sorry, I was reading something else.
Sure. Can you guess what state is suing Google to help protect their consumers' privacy?
California?
It almost always is, isn't it? But no, it's not. It instead is the great state of Texas.
What?
All right, so Texas actually has some laws on the book for collecting and using biometric data, which can, be like fingerprint, like iris scans, whatever it is. There's a facial recognition. All that stuff is considered biometric data in Texas, and there are safeguards against the way it's supposed to be collected. Now, what Texas is alleging is that Texans' biometric data, including characteristics of an individual's face and voice, without their informed advanced consent, was being collected into something that Google is using for its own internal things. It's not a feature the user signed up for. It's not something they asked for. It was being collected with the purpose of identifying them and improving other services for Google, like perhaps advertising or some of their other stuff that relies on being invasive in order to track people. So this is obviously concerning for people who have, like me, like a Pixel device or something that's constantly interacting with your biometric data. And in this case, it looks like there is a good amount of lawsuits that are targeting Google from Texas, alleging various types of data being collected without people's consent. So the attorney general says, "I will continue to fight big tech to ensure privacy and security of all Texans," which, again, to me, was a little bit surprising.
Yeah.
But I would say it's actually great to see that Texas is standing up for the collection and use of biometric data without consent. Obviously, that's concerning to have a big company basically owning your biometric data and doing whatever they want with it if you have absolutely no say in it. Obviously, you need to be able to open your phone or unlock something, but them recording your speech and using it to potentially identify you in other places sounds a little bit like Clearview AI, just for advertising instead of law enforcement. So we also have another case of cyber criminals going pretty hard into what seemed like extreme crimes and then getting not that much time for it. So if I, on the phone, proceeded to call a bunch of victims, do a bunch of bad stuff, and issue death threats, I imagine I would go to jail for prison, 10 years, something, especially if I was also stealing and doing a bunch of disruptive stuff. But in this case, it seems like these SIM swappers who were absolutely doing that kind of stuff, they actually threatened to kill someone's wife unless they gave up an Instagram handle that was short. It was considered like an OG Instagram handle. They actually threatened to kill this person's wife if they didn't comply. Now, they were actually into all sorts of dirtbag cybercrime. And by that, I mean SIM swapping, identifying victims with cryptocurrency, selling or transferring victims' login credentials, account handles, and then cryptocurrency. So they would sell basically anything they could get. They would also beg the friends and family of victims they had taken over the account of for money, saying that they were in trouble, kidnapped, they needed money for some reason, and attempt to make money that way. So they really didn't care about the way they were making, cybercrime money. They would do basically anything, no matter how illegal or immoral, in order to try to make a buck while sitting from behind a computer. It's just kind of stunning to me that a lot of these cyber criminals that are blatantly malicious, issuing death threats and doing highly disruptive and illegal things, end up getting relatively light sentences. Because 2 years for crimes involving death threats, you walk into a bank and do that, I guarantee you're going to get more time than that. But these people made far more than they ever could have from a bank robbery, and they did it with substantially less risk. Because currently, it seems like our laws are fairly lax on
Mhm.
people that can affect a lot of different people's lives doing these sorts of crime, yet they do it from behind a computer screen, so it's
Mhm.
considered less intense than doing it in person. Kind of shocking
Yeah.
that they only got because the statutory maximum penalty was 20 years in prison.
Wow.
So they got what, like a tenth
Yeah.
of what they could have. They must be very handsome.
Well, and that's a growing concern I have, is that going forward, we're going to see a lot more criminals elements turn to cybercrime for those very reasons, because of the perceived notion that if they do get caught, they'll get off let easy. So it is going to be concerning seeing how that proceeds going forward, especially as with stories I talked about today, where it becomes more accessible for those lower skilled attackers to perform sophisticated attacks.
Yeah, we've officially reached the era where it is more profitable and less risky to rob a Bitcoin bro than it is to rob a bank. That's depressing to say out loud. All right.
We are almost out of time.
Yeah. So one story that's interesting, a group of Asian casinos has been targeted in a relatively sophisticated attack. Dicey F. What a great name for that.
Okay.
But they have been specifically targeting these casinos not to go after the very obvious target of the casino's money, but actually to go after people who are going there to gamble. So this is actually a cyber espionage campaign that has two forks. One of them is named Tifa and the other Yuna. Now, Yuna is the more sophisticated of the two sister malicious programs. But the point of this is to drop a lot of different like potential software packages that could be used to conduct espionage, exfiltrate files, take logs, and then communicate continuously with the C2 server, which indicates a more highly targeted attack that's looking for like trade secrets and other things that might be beneficial to whoever is operating this campaign. So what's interesting about this is how targeted this is. They're not going after the money. They don't care about the money. They're interested in information. And that implies a state actor in most cases, because targeting like sensitive intellectual property, it could be a precursor to like a ransomware attack, but more often it's somebody who's trying to use a watering hole attack. They're trying, this is like kind of the definition of a watering hole attack. If you know a bunch of defense executives that are like hard gamblers on these online casinos, it makes sense to be targeting these sorts of people with attacks that are primarily meant to be very, very stealthy and look for sensitive information to exfiltrate. So an interesting campaign, and another warning to anybody who has an important job. Watering hole attacks are on the rise. They're especially favored by like Asian nation states who are targeting these sorts of websites that lots of people go to. But some of those people might be the exact targets they're looking for. So an interesting attack.
Okay, so I think we are out of time.
Oh, that's it? All right. All right. So yeah, that's all we have time for today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them on the YouTube video, and we will get back to answering them on Wednesday when we do our live Q&A on the Hack5 channel, as well as here. Yeah, a big shout out to Varonis for letting us do this every week. It's a lot of fun, and we'll see you next time. Bye.